The Handstielgranate 24, famous for its uses in movies and series like Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan. But this thing is not only a movie prop. This thing is a grenade that was actually used in combat and is probably one of the most recognizable grenades in human history. So today we're going to take a dive into the history of this thing and look how it was actually cursed by design and was maybe not so good as we remember it now. So let's go and dive into the video. So, although this is a Handstielgranate 24, so as the name says, 24 from 1924, the designs of the first Handstielgranate went back to the First World War actually, because in 1915 the German Empire would introduce the Stielhandgranate 15 from the date 1915. In total there would be 3 different models made, the 1915, so M15, M16 and the M17. What was the difference between these models? Well, they mostly improved the reliability because sometimes these things could explode while just being in the belt of a soldier, and yeah, you don't want that to happen to your soldiers. But there was a special thing about this grenade because, as you have probably realized and probably seen at different grenades, most grenades have stripes in them. But what for? Well, those are made to have a lot of shrapnel because when it explodes, all those lines burst out and you have small pieces of metal flying around, hereby wounding a lot of soldiers. This thing had that. It was just an explosion and it really relied on the concussion side of it. So it wasn't really a grenade to make wounded or make wounded soldiers. It was more a grenade to confuse them so they could get to their target and finish them off with their guns. So now we know the early history of the gun, of the hand grenade, of course. So now let's get on to the most famous model, the M24. So let's go. So the most famous design of the Handstielgranate was the Handstielgranate 24. So this was made during the Weimar Republic, and it was a first improvement actually of the one of the first improvements that the German army made under the strict regulations of the Allied. Because after World War I, of course, they were limited to what their army could and could not do, so yeah. What was the big difference between this grenade and the grenade we saw in the First World War, the M17? Well, the biggest difference was it was made to make the German army more agile. Things like the wood were lengthened, but shortened, and there were some other small difference made. But why? Well, also, normally this thing would have a hook, a belt hook here at the top, so they could attach it to the uniform belt, right here, attach it to the uniform belt and carry it around. But it was not that handy during combat because it is kind of an uncomfortable thing to have wobbling around. So by making these designs, they could now place it in between the belt and they could run around too in combat because the uniform belt held it tight enough so it wouldn't fall out, but it was also loose enough so they could just pull it out and throw it at the enemy. But of course we have been constantly talking about this being a grenade, but how did it work? Well, first of all, before I explain, this is a fake grenade, it's not a real one, it's completely made out of wood. Like it's, as you see, the painting is also not that good and you can see here the wood going through, so it is a complete replica, so YouTube, don't get scared. But let's get to it on the video. So, how would this thing work? You would you would screw this dop off right here, and there would be a cord with a porcelain ball falling out. You could pull the cord and throw it away. Easy as that. In between you pulling the cord and this thing exploding, you had approximately 4.5 seconds, which is not that long, because it's a myth actually in war movies that people can throw this thing away, well, back at the enemy. So you see sometimes Germans screwing this thing off, throwing it. 4.5 seconds is really quick. Like when you pulled it till you throw it until it has landed, believe me, there have already been some seconds by, and since then, if you have your time to find grenade, believe me, until you have found it, it already exploded. So this thing already is formidable weapon. That's why it was used from 1924 until the end of the war in 1945. Well, the war started in 1939, but you know what I mean. There were already 2 variants of the thing also made. The first one being the Nebelhandgranate 39. So the Nebelhandgranate 39. So this thing was, well, not this thing, but the Nebelhandgranate was a smoke grenade because the German army was in need of a proper smoke grenade, and that thing was made. The second one was the Handschellgranate 24 Kalt. These things were marked with a K on top of the cap. But why? Well, in Russia they experienced some things that Napoleon also experienced, extreme cold. And sometimes, due to this extreme cold, the ignition of the explosive wouldn't work. And with a grenade, that's not so handy. So they made different designs and they changed some things so they could use this even in extreme cold. And we have it mainly like modern Russia, that area. Well, around that area they were mostly used. Throughout this video we have already made a little bit about why this thing was actually not so strong. But these things, although being very recognizable in movies, weren't that good of a grenade, and some people even argue it was actually a failed design. So let's look into that and why people say it's a failed design. Let's go! Whew. So, what was the problem with these grenades? Well, it's actually fairly simple. As I already told you, these things were not made to have shrapnel. So these things would explode, but as you see, there is not much. Well, maybe the wood can splinter a little bit, and this cap is from steel, so it can also splinter a little bit, but not that much. In difference with the American grenades, you saw that it had like these stripes going around, and when it exploded, you have these tiny pieces that could fill up a room. So you could throw a grenade in there and fill up a room. Instead of a German grenade, in theory, you could throw it in a room and the person standing around it wouldn't have any damage, or, well, maybe some hearing damage, but for the rest, they wouldn't be in life danger. With the American grenades and the English grenades and so on, you would have that. So, as I already said, it was not made as a shrapnel, but it was more made as a concussion. The thing is, you don't have a lot of that because, well, you don't have a lot of use. Maybe in a city and in urban fighting you do, but for the rest, you don't have a lot of use with a grenade that isn't able to kill or hurt people. Also, these things were not strong enough to take out vehicles. So you would then think, okay, maybe it hasn't a lot of shrapnel, but when throwing it at a vehicle, it surely would help explode the vehicle. Well, no. It wasn't heavy enough. It was only filled with 170 grams of TNT, if I remember correctly. So that isn't enough to explode the vehicle or to cause any major damage to the vehicle. So that's why most people would argue that this thing was a failed design. Although there would be difference made and there would be kind of sleeves made that could throw out of it and like pull around it. So you had like the sleeve of fragmentation. It kind of failed in my opinion. It is a good thing. It is a good thing. I surely think it's a wonderful grenade if you consider the concussion fact. But in urban fighting, yes, it's useful. But for the rest, you don't have a lot of a grenade that can't make real, proper casualties and everything. So, did it fail? Well, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know. Do you think this was a design flaw, or was it just a smart way of concussing the enemy and taking it out by your own guns? Or do you think, nah, it was just a design flaw? Let me know in the comments. But the Handschellgranate 24, although being mostly shown in movies, was not the last design of it. There was actually a future design in 1943. Sorry for the mess up. So in 1943, let's look into that. Let's go. So, as I said, there was also a future design. Well, there was also a design made in the future, but you don't see that often in movies, which is quite of sad actually. But it also has its reasons because it was not as widely used as this one. But what was the new version? Well, at the end of the war, the Germans were kind of getting the hang of seeing that mass and cheap production can work if you do it correctly. So what they did, they remade this thing kind of and made it with less parts and with cheaper parts. So it was cheaper to make and you could make it quicker. Also big difference, the way you ignited it was, well, it was still with the cord, but there was a different way to doing it, so they wouldn't have to make a hole through the complete piece of wood, which saved a lot of time. So at the end of the war, these things became faster to make, they became also more cheaper to make, so it was actually a big improvement, but they had some reliability issues. That was a difficult word to say. Also, there were also, again, improvements made, differences made, also field differences made, like putting sleeves with like shrapnel sleeves around them and everything. But in like kind of how you see them, they were mostly the same. So, we have learned a lot about the Handstiegelgranate today. One thing we do know, it is one of the most recognizable grenades in human history, and it was a grenade that kind of changed the way of war. Well, not the way of war, but the way we used grenades. Before it was more to casualties, but now you see in modern armies they also use grenades that is just for concussion, so you can confuse the enemy. So, I hope you I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see another video I made, it's about the B-17, but not only about it being a formidable weapon and formidable airplane, but also about the dark side and how the plane was almost as lethal for its crew as for the enemies it was trying to bomb. So I hope you will go take a look at that video, but for now, World War II out.